In Cursed Woods, Maren hunts the echo of her missing sister, Eloan. As a sinister figure emerges at the brink of chaos, fate fractures, teetering between salvation and eternal oblivion. A final, heart-stopping moment awaits. Maren Hart is a resilient woman in her late 20s whose determined, haunted eyes betray a deep sorrow and unyielding resolve. After her sister's mysterious disappearance in the cursed forests of Grendel's Hollow, Maren embarks on a perilous quest for answers. Her tense expression, framed by loosely tied, wind-blown hair and marked by the strain of countless sleepless nights, mirrors both hope and piercing fear. Dressed in practical, worn outdoor attire, a sturdy jacket, rugged boots, and simple jeans, she navigates treacherous, fog-laden trails and decaying village paths. Eloan Hart, aged 32, once exuded a free-spirited warmth that lit up even the darkest trails of Grendel's Hollow. Known for the distinctive red ribbon woven through her hair since childhood, she was both adventurous and methodical in her solitary wanderings through the ancient forest. In her mysterious disappearance, however, Eloan's memory has transformed into a spectral echo, a blend of cherished warmth and eerie enigma. Agnes is an elderly woman whose frail frame and time-worn features carry decades of sorrow, wisdom, and a burden of local legends. With eyes that shimmer with both faded memories and the terror of hidden truths, she speaks in hushed, deliberate tones about the curse that grips Grendel's Hollow. The village of Grendel's Hollow had always been surrounded by dense forests and winding trails that never seemed to lead to the same place twice. When Eloan Hart, a 32-year-old woman, disappeared during a solitary hike, no one could say exactly where she had gone. It was only known that she followed the North Trail, a path cutting through the damp, shadowy hills of Wormwood Forest. She was last seen at 7:42 a.m. by a local farmer, waving absent-mindedly before disappearing under the tree canopy. 2 days later, her younger sister, Maren Hart, arrived in the village with a downcast face and red, tear-filled eyes. She knew her sister's habit of isolating herself. Eloan was known to vanish for hours, sometimes days, but never without leaving a message. Never without calling. Never without warning. On the third day, the villagers organized a search. That's when they found something, a red ribbon, tied to a low branch about 3 kilometers from the trail's entrance. The ribbon was old, worn, and soaked by the forest's dampness, but Maren recognized it immediately. Eloan had worn that ribbon in her hair since childhood. Further along, the trail seemed to have been swallowed by the forest. Disordered footprints vanished in the mud as if dragged by unseen hands. A strong smell of iron and wet earth hung in the air. The vegetation looked different, darker and denser. There were symbols carved into the tree trunks, symbols that no one could identify. One of the volunteers, upon seeing them, turned pale and refused to continue. He said that he had grown up there and that stretch of forest was wrong. The old one said to never cross it. That night, Maren had a dream. Eloan called to her from the woods, her voice muffled by something unseen. And when she finally found her sister, her face was turned the wrong way. Maren woke with a racing heart and short breaths. The guest room where she stayed seemed to shrink around her, suffocated by the heavy silence of the early morning. The image of Eloan's face turned around still pulsed in her mind. This wasn't just a dream, it had something more, something that whispered at the edge of understanding. A presence. The following morning, she returned to the trail alone. The volunteers had decided to call off the search after 3 days without concrete clues. She wanted to vanish, some said. Maybe she got lost on purpose. But Maren knew her sister. Eloan was restless, yet methodical. She would never risk disappearing without marking her route or noting the way. Guided by that thought, Maren returned to the cottage where Eloan had been staying, a modest cabin on the edge of the village. The interior was neat except for one detail, a map, partially burned on the kitchen floor, its corners charred and still smelling of soot. In the center, there was a red circle drawn with a marker. The North Trail was circled, but it led to a place that did not exist on ordinary maps, a location known only as the Silent Falls. Maren had never heard of that. On the back of the map, a folded note read, "If I do not return, destroy the map. Do not follow the sounds. Do not look back." The handwriting was Eloan's. The warning seemed delirious, but Marin's gut tightened like a fist. She put the note in her pocket and kept the map. This was more than a simple disappearance. There was fear in her sister's words, a fear that went beyond reason. That night, Marin heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow, dragging steps. She opened the window, but there was only the pitch-black forest. Still, the sound of the steps persisted, circling the house. When she closed her eyes, she heard whispers. A name repeated among the bushes, Eloan. Eloan. Marin awoke before sunrise, her eyes burning, and with the unsettling feeling that someone was watching her still clinging to her skin. She had spent the night awake, listening to the rustle of leaves outside and the footsteps that never completely receded. In the morning, she found mud marks on the porch, bare, small footprints that couldn't belong to an adult. With the burned map in hand, she set out alone. The north trail was shrouded in thick fog, and the cold seemed to intensify as she left the village behind. The forest was different here, denser, damper, as if exhaling something ancient and rotten. There were no birdsong, no wind, only the echo of her own steps, as if the woods were waiting. Hours later, she reached an unmapped fork hidden behind twisted bushes. One path led to a mist-shrouded ravine, and from afar, a sound of running water could be heard, but not like a river. It was irregular, as if the sound were distorted. She descended to a clearing where a moss-covered rock formation stood. And there they were, the so-called Silent Falls. But there was no water. The name was literal, the sound ceased upon approaching. Marin felt the silence hit her like a blow, even her heartbeats seemed muted. Around the clearing, there were claw marks on the trees, as if someone had tried to climb, escape, or warn. On the ground, she found something buried among the roots, a videotape. It was wet, but the label was legible, E-Win07/03, Eloan's initials. Back at the cabin, she used an old player to watch it. The shaky recording showed Eloan walking along a foggy trail, the same one Marin had just followed. The camera trembled, and Eloan murmured something. Before the tape abruptly cut off, a figure appeared behind her, motionless, faceless, almost blending with the trees. Marin froze. She stepped back. Then she heard a sound behind her, the tape rewinding by itself. The tape continued to rewind on its own, its mechanical sound filling the silence in the cabin. Marin tried ejecting it, but the button was stuck. The screen flickered, as if something wanted to break free from the image, to escape the tape. Suddenly, the recording played again, but this time differently. Eloan was no longer alone. The camera now appeared to be held by another hand, filming her from a distance, hidden among the branches. Her voice echoed weakly, "Someone is following me, won't let me sleep," he whispers when I close my eyes. The screen went black. Then, only noises remained. Heavy dragging, like bare feet in the mud, followed by a low, constant sound resembling a heavy breath. Then, a frozen frame, the same Silent Falls clearing, but with dozens of tapes scattered on the ground. All marked with different dates. All with the name E-Win. Marin turned off the device. She left the cabin with a pounding heart. The forest seemed to watch her, not with eyes, but with presence. She decided to return to the clearing, she had to understand. Arriving there, she began to dig around the roots, driven almost mad by the idea that there would be more tapes buried. She found 5. She took them back and spent the night watching each one. They were like visual diaries, documenting Eloan's last days. But the oldest recording showed something disturbing, Eloan finding another tape, belonging to a different woman, exhibiting the same paranoid behavior. And in the final seconds of that tape, the older woman whispered, "He is in the forest. That which remains. He will not let the memory die. He watches, until you forget who you are." Maren woke on the cabin floor, not knowing when she had slept. The tapes had vanished. Only one remained in the player. And now, it was her face on the recording. The image was blurry, yet unmistakable, Maren, sitting in the same clearing where she had found the tapes. The video showed her speaking softly, muttering incoherent words. She paused the tape, trying to remember if she had been there, but her mind was a blur. Fragments of memory battled to emerge, a sharp sound in the forest, a presence at her back, the feeling of being copied. With nerves on edge, Maren decided to seek help. She descended to the nearby village, where the locals avoided contact with outsiders. When she mentioned Eloan Wynne, their eyes averted. Only an elderly woman, Agnes, pulled her inside and locked the door behind. "You've meddled with what should have remained buried," Agnes said, her glassy eyes filled with fear. "Eloan wasn't the first. And she won't be the last. That trail, it holds echoes." Maren struggled to understand. Agnes recounted stories of other women who had taken the trails and vanished, always after finding tapes, always after saying they heard him. They call him the Watcher. Or that which remains. A being that won't let the past die. He lives in memory. And when you see him, it's already too late. Before she left, Agnes warned, "If you hear your own name coming from the forest, run. And never, ever answer." That night, back at the cabin, Maren woke to see dense mist creeping through the window. Then she heard it, coming from outside in a whispered voice, almost familiar. "Maren." She froze. The voice repeated, this time closer, "Maren." But it wasn't her own voice. It was Eloan's. The mist pressed against the cabin as if trying to infiltrate every crack. Maren rose from the bed, her footsteps heavy on the cold wooden floor. The voice calling her was now clear, coming from somewhere in the shadows, deep within the dense fog. She slowly opened the door, and the chilly air embraced her instantly. The forest sounds felt thicker, fuller, a muted symphony of nocturnal life held in stasis. Eloan's voice echoed again, this time more urgent. "Maren, you have to come." Maren hesitated. Agnes's warning echoed in her mind, "Never, never answer." But something in Eloan's voice pulled her forward, a bond she couldn't explain. Uncertain yet compelled, she stepped out, venturing toward the forest. The trail was different, distorted. The tree branches bent as if trying to distract her. Each step grew heavier. The air thickened with a strange, acidic scent that made her swallow hard. Suddenly, she stopped. The trees around her seemed to shift, pulsating. She felt a cold, threatening presence behind her. Turning quickly, there was nothing, only dense mist. She wanted to return to the cabin, but something held her. Eloan's voice grew stronger, not distant now but coming directly from ahead, "You're closer than you think." Maren looked to the ground and noticed a deep, recent barefoot print imprinted in the wet soil. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Eloan's. It was different. The voice whispered one last time, "Turn left." And, inexplicably, she obeyed. Maren didn't know what compelled her to move forward, yet her steps quickened, almost rushed. Eloan's voice was no longer a mere call but a command, its tone shifting from whisper to an urgent shout. The trail ahead altered as she walked. Trees that once lined the path began to curve, narrowing the way. Maren hesitated, her eyes scanning the surroundings, while fear took root in her mind. The echo of Eloan's voice filled her ears, almost as if it said, "You're so close, Maren. Just a little further." Her thoughts became muddled, she felt as though she were in a realm where fear and anxiety intermingled with each step. The forest fell silent, only her rapid breathing and heartbeats were audible. Finally, she reached the end of the curve. The forest opened into a clearing. At the center lay a large, flat stone on the ground. Surrounding it, a profound silence reigned, the air icy but thick and alive, as if it were breathing. Then she saw it. Standing next to the stone was a figure, emaciated and pale, draped in a grey cloak. It was Eloan. But something was wrong. Eloan didn't look human. Her face was distorted, a mass of shifting shadows and trembling lights. Her eyes, once blue, were now dull, lifeless. The figure opened its mouth, and Maren, a chill shooting down her spine, heard another voice. It was not Eloan's. It was something older, something that shouldn't be. She won't come back, Maren. Maren tried to step back, but her feet were frozen. The figure before her extended its hand. Its flesh seemed to tear apart, disintegrating into powder with every movement. No, do not touch her. Maren thought, but her body failed her. Her eyes remained fixed on what was left of Eloan, or what she had become. Every misstep dragged her further into darkness. Then, a scream, a sharp, terrible cry, ripped through the air. Maren couldn't tell if it came from the figure or the forest, but her chest tightened. Eloan advanced slowly, her feet barely touching the ground, as if she were floating. You're trapped here now, the voice, whether Eloan's or something else, said in a tone no longer that of her friend. The place from which she comes, there's no return. Terror seized her. She tried to turn, but the tree's branches began to reach out toward her, constricting her movement. The air grew heavy, and the world around her began to distort, stretching as if seen through a warped mirror. Before she could react, everything dissolved. She felt as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Maren suddenly awoke. She was back in the cabin, unsure how, unaware when she had returned, yet everything was quiet. The fire in the hearth still burned, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Everything appeared normal as before, yet something was off. The environment was motionless. No rustling of leaves, no wind. Absolute silence enveloped her, and Maren felt it consuming her. She rose and approached the window. What she saw made her freeze. The forest had returned, but the trees were deformed, as if the branches twisted into eerie, distorted shapes. She returned inside. The air felt oppressive, as if the cabin itself was alive, watching her. Maren sat on the bed, terror growing within her. Where was Eloan? Where were the answers? What had truly happened at that clearing? She looked at the floor and saw a fallen leaf, one she did not recognize. It was a vibrantly green leaf, seemingly glowing under the hearth's light. When she touched it, a strange sensation shot through her, and for a brief moment, Maren caught a reflection in a mirror. But the reflection wasn't hers. It was Eloan's. The reflection of Eloan, or what looked like her, disappeared as soon as Maren touched the leaf. Paralyzed, Maren stared at the empty mirror before her, while a heavy weight seemed to settle over her entire being. The air was dense, as if the cabin itself were holding her captive. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours, as time became indistinct. When Maren finally opened her eyes, the room appeared changed. The walls seemed more distant, and the flickering fire in the hearth had dimmed considerably. Then she heard faint footsteps, a soft rustling from the corridor. She sprang up, her heart pounding as she approached the door. The corridor lay empty. Yet something lingered, a presence not visible but palpable in the air, in the musty scent of moss and decaying wood that had haunted her since the beginning. Maren stepped to the window and looked out. The forest seemed to be in motion, as though the trees were closing in, more condensed and menacing. There were no visible trails, only dancing shadows. Then she heard a whisper, a murmur not of the breeze, but something deeper. Maren, you are here. Forever. She spun around, but the room was empty. What was happening? What was that sound? Was it Eloan's voice? No, she could no longer trust the voices. But what else was there? Something was seeping into her mind, distorting reality. The forest, the trees, the cabin, all felt alive, as if consuming the very essence of existence. Maren no longer knew what to do. She had tried to escape the forest, but every step only led her in circles, as if the path were infinite. The night was heavy, the air suffocating, and the shadows among the trees seemed to be waiting. Then she saw it, a door where nothing had been before. An ancient, dark wooden door with intricate carvings. Hesitantly, she approached and her trembling fingers touched the handle. Something urged her to open it. The door creaked open, and Maren stepped in. Inside, there was nothing, no furniture, no walls, only an expanse of darkness. But in the center of the void stood a figure. Eloan. Or at least, what remained of her. Eloan's face was distorted, her eyes empty, as if black holes absorbing all light. Eloan? Maren whispered, her voice trembling. Where are you? What happened? There was no answer, only the sound of heavy breathing emanating from the darkness. Something else moved there, something that should not belong in Maren's world. In that moment, she understood, the real Eloan was not present. Something had taken her place, an entity that manipulated her memories and emotions. Maren stepped back, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the void. Alone now, the darkness closed in, wrapping her like a dense shroud. Eloan's voice echoed in her mind, but it was no longer gentle, it was distorted and menacing. You were never meant to leave here, Maren. You will never understand. The ground trembled under her feet, and a crushing pressure built in her head, as if the air itself were thickening. Then, something strange occurred, the darkness cracked, and a faint light began to shine. Maren looked around. She wasn't sure where she was, but a familiar feeling stirred. The light grew, revealing an old wooden table covered in objects. On the table was a photograph of Eloan, but not a recent one. It was faded, and Eloan's expression was one of terror. Maren picked up the photo and, studying it closely, noticed something odd. Eloan wasn't alone in the picture. There was a shadow in the background, a vague, dark figure, staring directly at the camera, its eyes hidden in darkness. The mystery of the photograph made Maren tremble. What did it mean? And what about that shadow? It was something she was never meant to see, something beyond comprehension. She returned the photograph to the table and stepped back. The air felt heavy as though something was about to happen. Then she heard the sound of footsteps, light but constant. Slowly, she turned and saw a figure at the entrance. It was Eloan, or at least it appeared to be. But her eyes. They were different. They were opaque, like bottomless voids, sucking in all light. Her body slumped as if burdened by an unspeakable weight. The figure extended its hand, and Maren hesitated. But Eloan's hand was no longer human, it was twisted, formless, like shadows. Maren, the voice came out as a mere whisper, yet Maren felt it like a sentence. She no longer knew whether to trust Eloan, or what was left of her. Maren couldn't tell if the figure before her was truly the spirit of Eloan or something that had taken her place. Darkness surrounded her, and the chasm ahead was greater than anything she had ever experienced. She knew she had to choose, but choose what? She took a step forward, eyes fixed on the figure that no longer appeared human. Deep within her mind, one final question echoed, was she seeking the truth, or was she simply being dragged toward the same fate as Eloan? Maren advanced through the forest as if entering a maze of memories and shadows. The path that had once been straight now split into confusing trails, each choice echoing with the voices of the past. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, carried secrets long forgotten. As she walked along sandy, sodden trails, she discovered remnants of old campfires and rudimentary structures, as if many souls had journeyed here but never returned. The air vibrated with an almost tangible energy. She heard fragments of conversations, distant laughter, and laments mingling with the wind's hiss. At one point, the echoes formed indistinct words that seemed to say, "Choose, Maren, choose to live or lose yourself." This whisper reverberated in her mind, making her doubt herself. The uneven ground was covered with dry leaves and exposed roots that seemed to pull her into the forest's ancient past. Among twisted branches, she found primitive paintings on stone, symbols that defied logic and history, telling stories of victims, guardians, and an entity that resided in the heart of the forest. As she searched for a way out, Maren realized that the labyrinth was not just physical but also mental. Each twist confronted her with images of her past, hidden pains, and unspoken fears. She saw her reflection in stagnant pools and mossy surfaces, as though the forest was repeating its story to her. Nothing here was accidental. In the deepest recesses of the labyrinth, Maren found a clearing bathed in a pale, almost spectral light. In the center stood stones arranged in a circle, covered in ancient inscriptions, a silent altar where time seemed to condense. As she approached, the whispers grew louder, carrying the voices of long-dead ancestors who appeared to guard the forest's history. In this charged atmosphere of melancholy energy, Maren heard untold stories. Words like curse, bond, and sacrifice floated in the air, while vivid images of forgotten rituals flashed through her mind. Each engraved stone spoke of old pacts between the inhabitants of the land and the dark essence of the forest. One soft, distinct voice whispered, "We were chosen to guard secrets that time tried to bury. And you, Maren, bear the mark of those who should never have been freed." The impact of these words reverberated through her soul, making her wonder if her destiny was inextricably linked to the tragic fate of lost souls. Almost unconsciously, Maren touched one of the cold stones. In an instant, flashes of images, faces, tears, and twisted smiles raced through her mind. She realized the ancestors were not mere memories but specters trapped by an unfulfilled promise. The whisper of the ancients was both a warning and a lament. The clearing was a crossroads between remembrance and oblivion. Maren understood that her journey was not only about finding Eloan but also confronting the ghosts that haunted the forest, and, by extension, humanity itself. From the clearing, Maren continued along a path that led to the intersection of reality and dream. The environment grew surreal, trees with translucent crowns, their leaves outlined by an inner glow, and a ground that shimmered as if covered in liquid memory. In the midst of this ethereal setting, a portal materialized, not a physical door, but a vortex of light and shadow pulsing rhythmically. It beckoned Maren, its presence heavy with the weight of impending decisions and unsaid answers. After a brief hesitation, she took a deep breath and stepped through. As she crossed, the world around her shattered into a jumble of colors and sounds, propelling her into a liminal space between worlds. On the far side, reality turned bitter. She found herself in a distorted version of the village, with deserted streets and houses whose windows seemed to watch her. Every sound, the distant ringing of a bell, the murmur of the wind, bore the weight of a collective past that refused to fade. Maren wandered this twin realm, where present moments intermingled with echoes of a dark history. She glimpsed visions of lost souls wandering aimlessly and, among them, a faint outline of Eloan. An unseen force linked everything in this domain, where logic and the supernatural coexisted silently. As she traversed this space of transition, Maren felt the enormity of her choices. She wasn't sure whether she was moving toward salvation or further into damnation, but every step carried her closer to a truth that promised to be both liberating and terrifying. Now immersed in this hybrid reality, Maren finally discovered an ancient cabin set beside a black lake that mirrored the gloomy sky. On its weathered walls were clippings from old newspapers and faded photos, silent witnesses to decades of disappearances that haunted the region. A recurring pattern emerged, all were connected to the forest's legend, to a curse that plagued Eloan's trails. Inside, the darkness alternated with brief shafts of light filtering through cracks. A chill ran down her spine when she saw, in one corner, a fogged mirror. Approaching it, her reflection merged with a pale image of a woman, likely Eloan, whose eyes carried the sorrow of countless lost lives. The truth began to take shape, terrifyingly clear. Eloan had never been just a victim. She had been a guardian, forced into a role by hidden circumstances, a messenger of an ancient pact between the forest and those daring enough to defy it. Maren realized that her sister had been absorbed into this cycle, a cycle in which disappearances were merely transitions to another state of being. Rummaging through scattered notebooks and diaries in the cabin, Maren found entries detailing rituals, prayers, and dire warnings. There were accounts of encounters with the Watcher, a figure who seemed to wield an insidious control over the lost souls. As she read, the truth materialized. The curse could not be explained or punished by human logic. It spanned the realms of pain and memory, of the living and the damned. Maren faced a grim dilemma: to continue the search for answers, risking being consumed by the abyss, or to accept that the fate of her sister, and so many others, was sealed in that ancient obscurity. At the final juncture between dream and reality, Maren found herself at the edge of the Black Lake, where the water reflected an endless twilight. The atmosphere was laden with a silence that seemed to absorb every heartbeat, while the sky merged into hues of gray and purple. She knew this moment was either the final turning point, or the beginning of something irreversible. Slowly, the spectral figure of Eloan reappeared at the lake's edge. This time, her presence radiated a melancholic calm, a silent invitation to confront fate. Without words, their eyes met. In Eloan's gaze, Maren saw a mix of compassion, sorrow, and perhaps the promise of redemption that she had never fully understood. Step by trembling step, she approached, each one a simultaneous farewell and acceptance. At the very moment when they nearly touched, the forest around them began to crumble in murmurs and sighs, as if nature were reclaiming what was hers. The trees bent low, and winds carried the last whispered words of the ancestors: not all that is lost can be found. Not every soul can be saved. Maren realized that a final choice awaited her: to follow her sister's path and merge with the eternal memory of the forest, or to fight to return to the world of the living, burdened forever by this indescribable truth. In that suspended moment, as Eloan's hand brushed hers in a brief, ethereal contact and the lake blazed with near-divine light, Maren closed her eyes. The forest's final whisper enveloped her. When the first rays of a new day broke over the horizon, all that remained was the echo of a murmured promise. And so, the trails continue.